Chapter 4 The Names of Gods. Tiger with flame-like eyes, an agile and foam animal beware. The torches are sizzling, the time of hunt is here. Beware, beware, O tiger, enemy burst into the jungle at dawn, hunters' fangs and claws, prepare to fight for your life. Song of the Tiger King, traditional chant performed during the High Throne Festival. Kiranen. The Archmatron led us through winding corridors without saying a word. I felt only relief and great exhaustion. I was just glad to have gotten out of the cave, and that was all. If the thought of what was happening there at that moment wouldn't leave me alone. It gnawed at my soul like a tree borer. I didn't know why she came for us personally. Maybe everyone else was involved in the ritual, but if that were the case, why wasn't she there? She led us into a large, round room laid out with carpets. The space was almost empty, with only a small circular table on legs made of alum, and the figure of the Archmother, illuminated by 2 lamps. We fell to our knees. The priestesses bowed deeply, then touched her hands to her lips, chest, and womb. Then she sat on the cushions and gestured for us to take a place by the table. At least, I assumed she gestured to home, so I modestly knelt on my folded legs right by the door. The Archmatron lazily reached for a small metal stick wrapped in leather and struck the gong standing beside the table. An adept entered the room before the sound had even fully faded. She placed a tall jug and 2 metal cups on the table, filled them, and silently left. I thought it was the same one who had assisted the old man when he brought us food. Of course, only 2 cups. After all, I was just an adept. A Kashyyyk. I was invisible, but that suited me just fine. Hone immediately started complaining. One is not supposed to drink fermented liquids. The joy they bring is unnatural and stirs up evil. Only— "Oh, stop it already!" the princess snapped. "I need a real conversation, and I'm not going to play around with the old language. Don't you know the commandments? Is this your first time exchanging support?" I swallowed instinctively, hoping it wasn't audible throughout the room. I noticed there were no guards in sight. We could still escape, dragging the Archmatron with us. This farce couldn't last much longer before one of us, or both of us, did something unforgivable. "Mask! Take off that cursed mask!" she shouted. "You are not at the market!" Hone slowly unbuckled the straps, lifted the mask, and removed it from his head. "Of course! I knew it!" She took a sip from her cup, stood up, and paced quickly around the room. "I knew it!" She was furious. I tensed my muscles experimentally, and shifted into a position where I could spring to my feet with a single jump. The priestess kicked some vessel, which clattered across the floor. "A proselyte! A cursed proselyte! That's why you are holier than the very earth itself. How long have you served the mother? A month? Half a year, maybe? And already you are a priest, an enlightened being of unity. You try to be more devout than the prophetess herself to wash away the sins of your moon-cursed blood." She turned to the table. "Drink!" Hone obediently downed the cup. Now we are both equally sinful, aren't we? But don't forget, I am the daughter of the earth here. That still counts, doesn't it? Or has everything changed? Proselytes with iron-skirt faces become preachers and couriers just because they supported the prophetess at the right moment, while I served the mother since birth, in Saurogar, and then in this wretched place. I became an adept to avenge my mother, was forced into an unclean life by my father, who served a foreign dynasty. He wanted to touch me. He wanted to touch my mother without the goddess' consent. He drank wine and tea. He came stinking of wine and enslaved her. I heard it every single night. He ate meat. Nothing mattered to him except that cursed imperial gold. Everything he earned, he lost in dice, and we were kept hungry. The goddess took me in when I was 6. I killed my father in his sleep and fled to the temple. I walked for 20 years to achieve enlightenment. And what enlightened you, if I may know? A draft. The prophetess. Or maybe you got tired of endlessly waiting for war and nonsense about trade, peace, and building Kireni's order? From a mile away I can see you were an imperial soldier. And not long ago at that. You wore imperial symbols and waited endlessly for a loot and blood. But the war never came, right? And now you lecture me about the cup of Mars milk? I'm a genuine Amitraji and I can drink the milky fire. Even prophetess cannot change that. I can't listen to this, Hone mumbled and bowed. Neophyte, I don't need the fire of a desert to wake up. I watched helplessly all my life as the broken world harms the daughters of the earth. As Kireni's sin and filth spread everywhere. I saw girls giving themselves away in vile temples. I saw them sold to men like a sheep. How they flaunted themselves to the vile sons of the moon, who should be serving them, just like my mother. And now you are some important messenger, while I sit here waiting, still waiting. She refilled the cups, drank half of hers, and sat down again. I've been sitting alone in this crumbling tower for 10 years, with one completely insane wise woman, who must be 100 years old by now. They laughed at us and threw mud at us, but I waited. There were years when I had to feed the Archmother with my own blood, but yet I still waited. The house of woman stood empty. Occasionally, a few daughters of the earth would sneak in to complain about their fate in the broken world, and hold hands in the rite of a ring of tears. And now, when true faith has finally returned, I have a few enlightened ones, a handful of worthless adepts, and a priest, and a binhon of infantry, and barely a hon of Perseid cavalry. Rebels wander the wastelands. People are migrating east across my bridge, and I'm supposed to enforce the code of earth alone, barehanded. You've seen what's happening in the city? I've gathered the goods that belong to the mother, but I don't know what comes next. The army guards the city and the bridge, but other than that, they'll do whatever they want. For now, I keep them in check. They still believe I have a temple's power, but when they drink spice beer, smoke bakun, or defile the daughters of the earth from low unenlightened castes, I have to pretend I don't see. I look into the vile moonlight eyes of a Binhon Bahande, and I see his cunning. She leaned towards home, who sat completely still, looking at her with an expressionless face. I could feel the tension in the room. I sensed that this woman was demanding something from us. I had been taught the basics of trade and diplomacy. I could tell that she was about to ask for something. If that didn't work, she would use the second hand. That's how the business is done. The right hand, payment, favor, encouragement, request, evoking pity, pretending friendships, alliance. Or the left hand, blackmail, threat, denunciation, withdrawal of the offer, or even violence. Take a look at my square. There are the grain rods, the grain that is so little of this year. I've taken back the temple herds, but men from the high castes are already waiting in the courtyards of the outer temple. If I hand over the herds and lend to the woman now, I'll lose control over them completely. The tower will be again in their pocket. I need power. I wait and wait, but to no avail. The drums have nothing to say to me, and the only herald has long since stopped bringing me anything, not even a greeting. He simply passes my rotten, empty tower. Listen here, courier. I know you don't carry news. Don't say anything. I know you're not allowed to. Don't say anything. She leaned even further over the table, pushed the cup aside, and carefully touched Holmes' hand. I know you carry the name. Silence fell. I thought that if she wanted our chest, we should just give it to her. Let her take what she wants, and we'll get across the bridge. The sooner the better. But Holmes remained silent. He could be silent for a while, as long as he hadn't heard an offer. But after that, not anymore. Then he'd have to show his hand, both the left and the right. Silence at first is just silence, but later it becomes a threat, a sharp threat, an insult. I don't know who is it for, but it should be for me, she said again, in a gentle tone. It's mine. I must have power. I was born in a land that had long been under the Quirinese boot. I don't remember the times of the code. The old one does, but she still mumbles her prayers and treats people. She brings more and more oppressors under the knives of a priest, and that's all she cares about. Only blood for the goddess. Well, I do want Mother to be full. Maybe it's true that only then she will begin to bless us, and all will become one. Maybe she'll look upon the lonely tower, which gives her so much. The old order is like a disease that we must burn away now, so that we can rebuild the code of earth later. Offerings keep the people in check, but they depend on the strength of the army. And what if the drums call the army elsewhere? What if a rebellion breaks out? This isn't the time when the low castes were proud that their children were going to fetch their mother. I've gathered a horde of temple guards, but they are too few, and there's no one to command them. Without the power of a name, none of this will work. I'm asking you. I beg and demand. I need something to control the high castes. I need people to build granaries. I need farmers, officials, I need overseers. But above all, I need the power of the name. Silence fell again. Archmatron, Holmes began cautiously. Whatever is being carried must reach its destination. The one who carries it does not exist. One is not important. Nor do they have a right to decide where the words go or who needs them. The path goes where it must, and it's guided by the higher wisdom, to which not everyone has access. But when the person returns to where they are waited, the promise will be fulfilled, and even the prophetess herself will learn of the tower's situation. You won't wait long, neither for the word nor for the enlightened to assist you, so that all become one. Salah ahidillah, it has been said. But beyond the bridge there's nothing important, she stated. Nothing more important than the settlement of Asheridan at the crossroads by the bridge, where those who should stay here as commanded are fleeing and should be working for the Archmother. Nothing more important than a lone Archmatron, threatened with powerlessness, chaos, and dependency on a few high families. Messengers like you travel to all the towers. What difference does it make which names goes to which? The decision has already been made. Holmes cut in, and I thought his role was getting the better of him. He should be bargaining something for us now. Was he really going to defend that cursed chest at all cost? Then again, the Archmatron hadn't showed her right hand yet. What did she intend to offer us? Gold? What good was gold to a priest of the Archmother? Especially when even the silly street stalls were all gone, and you couldn't buy anything anymore. Not a gourd of beer, nor a bulton, nor a handful of nuts. He reached into the fold of his priestly robe and showed the woman an iron spiked medallion. "This," he said, "means death. Death for anyone who breaks the seals and isn't the one meant to do it. Also for me, if I fail. You know this, Archmatron. Besides, you assume I carry the name. And I say it's not for me to know, not for me to think about." I noticed that Hone had dropped the melodic accent and convoluted grammar of the old language. It was a sign that he allowed the conversation to get closer. It was a gesture of the right hand. "Ah, it's obvious you carry the name," she replied, "and I know what it can do. I know what can happen to someone whom the name does not recognize. But I am ready. I have always been ready. The name will listen to me. I am certain because I saw it once, and it saw me." She straightened up and sat differently, more comfortably, leaning on her hand and relaxing, as if she had gotten what she wanted or had changed her mind. Hone did not move, still sitting in the posture of the left hand, signaling no. And the priestess still hadn't offered him anything. "Forgive me the old woman's impatience." The Archmatron spoke again, her tone now warmer. "I thought I had to at least try." "Very well. I only ask that you speak of me. Once every tower had its own name, but when the Archmother fell asleep, those names died or disappeared. This tower," she tapped the rug beside her, "had one too, even at the time when I arrived here first. There was little left, but enough for me to understand what the power of one of the goddess' names is. The power still smolders, but too weakly for me to use. Meanwhile, everything is slipping through my fingers. Just tell them, please. Tell them about me where it matters. Remind them that the settlement of Asherdam is waiting for the name. If it doesn't receive it, anything could happen. And now..." She reached for the little rod and struck the gong again, this time twice. "I will host you as a messenger should be hosted, so that you won't forget my tower." An adept entered the room, carrying a tray with several metal bowls and some strange vessel. It was silver, covered with holes forming patterns, standing on a base that resembled a shaft. "Yes," the Archmatron smiled, "it's exactly what you think. You will be able to share a sting with me. We will become one for the glory of the Underground Mother. That is what remains of the old name that slumbers in the caves of my tower. With this, you will remember me, and it will give you strength for the journey ahead. Once you feel what the unity of Mother is, you will endure everything afterwards." The priestess lifted the gleaming vessel from the stand and shook it lightly. Through the mesh of tiny holes, I could see something moving inside. "Give me your hand," she requested, opening a small hatch in the lid. Hone flinched visibly, his face twitching. I barely managed to stifle a shout. A scorpentine crawled onto the priestess' hand. Not as large as the one that once tried to kill me in my chambers at the House of Steel. This one was shorter than my little finger and bright red with yellow stripes. I watched as it slithered over the archmatron's hand, weaving between her fingers and bristling with its venomous pincers. Holm pulled his hand back. "I've sworn an oath of purity," he said. "I must return to where the word is. I am a messenger, the eyes and feet of the word, and I must not abandon it." "Hush, hush," the archmatron soothed him. "You are not a fool. Look how small it is. It's a subordinate. Look at the stripes. Haven't you seen ones like that before? The brown queen kills, the yellow grants obedience, and this one gives unity and contact with the goddess. Come, give me your hand. Let it sting us. Let everything become one. I don't have much time left. There's hardly any name left. They are almost no longer born. In the underground of my temple, only the ordinary black scorpentines crawl now. Their venom brings nothing but pain and sickness. But now, we should be left alone." She turned to the adept kneeling by the wall with her head bowed. "Take this moonbub to his cell. Let him rest before his journey and guard the ward of theirs. Let him eat and rest well." I bowed in silence, making sure that my face showed no trace of fear, only the innocent, dull stupidity of a pimpled Agaren. I had no idea what she was talking about. She treated the venomous insect as if it were a gift or a delicacy. But what if its venom really could do something? If a priestess could sense Holm's thoughts, or worse, if the underground mother herself looked upon him, it was easy to predict what would happen. I followed the girl, carrying a heavy basket with a lid in one hand and a lamp in the other. The sky above the winding corridors of the labyrinth had already turned black, and only the flickering flame illuminated our way. The girl walked ahead in silence, and I was grateful for the role of an idiot. I didn't have to speak or do anything. Just smile foolishly, scratch, and pick my nose. It was easy. She turned down the corridors without hesitation, confidently choosing the path among the walls, twisting like the intestines of a caship, so it took us only a few moments to reach the destination. All the while, my heart pounded, certain that something sudden would happen any moment. The sound of a horn, a bell, or a calm approach of priests or temple guards to take me down. I knew I would fight, but I also knew how long it would last, how much time it would take before they cornered me in a dead end, even if I managed to grab a weapon. I decided that if I could escape beyond the walls, I wouldn't try to cross that cursed bridge. I'd flee into the steppes, maybe find another bridge or ford. For now, nothing happened. The labyrinth was quiet, broken only occasionally by the squeaks of a night bird. We reached the place, the adept bent down, entered the cell, and then I heard the sound of her striking a fire. A flame flickered, filling the small room with warm yellow light. I knelt before the figurine of a Lady of the Harvest and touched my forehead to the floor. The adept lit the wick of a second lamp, the one illuminating the niche with the statue, then bent over the basket. "Can you speak?" she asked. "Answer me. You may wear the adept's jacket, but I am daughter of the earth, and you must obey me." I wished she could just leave already. I looked at her with the most frightened expression I could manage, opening my mouth foolishly in the hope she would lose interest. But it seemed she wouldn't give up so easily. "Answer me," I said. "Can you speak?" Yes," I said. "How old are you?" "About 20. I lied. A poor simpleton from Kesaldem wouldn't look like me at 17. She opened the basket and began pulling out balls covered with lids. Honestly, it felt like my stomach had died, and I doubted I could eat anything. There was something else in the basket, a large bundle wrapped in cloth she didn't touch, and it seemed she was even trying to avoid brushing against it. And who shaved your head like that? A war chariot, maybe? What's your name, even? I'm a Gurren. I shaved it at the temple, and on the way shaved it myself, 'cause it was growing back. Oh, you're not that pimpled, Gurren. And don't say I, or you will be hit. One was called like that since little. They let you keep your name? So maybe you're still a dog, huh? Or did they castrate you? Me a moon dog, I nodded. Oh, let me see. Out of nowhere, she reached between my legs and felt my pants. It felt like boiling water had been poured over me. I jumped back and covered myself. Not allowed! I croaked, rolling my eyes. I was tired of all this. I wanted to knock her out. You're such an idiot. It's you who isn't allowed. I'm a daughter of the earth. I can do whatever I want. And you have to listen to me. Let me see. Well. They left it all. How improper, Agaren. Don't you know that's where evil lies? Don't touch, I said. Forbidden. Master beats me. He'll beat you even worse if he finds that you didn't listen to me, you know. I had no idea what she wanted, but I had the worst suspicions. I backed away to the wall, but she immediately crawled after me on all fours and reached between my legs again. I shielded myself, so she hit me in the face and pushed my hand aside. I glanced at her basket, which I had kicked during the scuffle. The cloth wrapping around the bundle had loosened slightly, and through the gap I glimpsed a piece of blackened iron, tied with a red string and sealed with red wax. Everything became clear now. She had a box identical to the one we were carrying. It occurred to me that maybe the best course of action was to let her continue doing what she was doing, and give her a chance to swap the packages. That way, they'd eagerly let us continue our journey. But then, I remembered that the mat nowhere, the wise woman with her eye on her hand, was still at the bridge. And then another thought hit me. If I were in the place, I'd have to kill the messengers. It was like playing the game of tachis. I saw the arrangement of the pieces in my mind, imagining every move one by one. She would give me pleasure now, and while I was distracted, she would secretly switch the boxes. Then she'd blackmail me. The poor idiot knows what happens to someone who lies with a woman without the goddess' permission. He also knows no one would believe a moon dog, a low-ranking adept, and a fool on top of that. So, he'd keep quiet. But the travelers would continue, and once they arrived, they'd discover that the box didn't contain the name, or the letters, or whatever was supposed to be inside. The culprits would be obvious immediately. Those expecting the package wouldn't take this lightly. I doubted they'd see it as a clever prank and wagged a finger at the slyer matron, who took care of her temple. It was brutal, but I saw the outcome as if I were solving a calculation. It had only one solution: death for the messengers. The package wouldn't reach its destination, but they could claim it never arrived here either. Worse, sooner or later, someone would find 2 corpses lying in a ravine outside the city. We would feed the goddess, and our bones would be used to decorate another chamber. This scheme could end only this way. I kept resisting, but the girl wasn't Eagle Ivor, and I hadn't seen a woman in so long that it felt like ages ago. She clenched her hand and lifted her head, looking at me through her half-closed eyes, a mischievous smile playing on her slightly parted lips. Despite her shaved head and the spirals adorning her forehead and cheeks, she seemed dangerously, disturbingly familiar. That scared me even more. I already knew what I had to do, but I caught myself deliberately staying. Just a moment longer, one more movement of her hand. I tore myself free and pushed the adept away. "You're evil! It's forbidden! God is watching! Can't do this! They warned me! They warned about temptations! Evil thoughts! They warned me! You're temptation! You're evil thought!" "Oh, shut up, fool!" she snarled. I deliberately shouted at the top of my lungs. "Hara! Silence, dog!" She struck me across the temple. I didn't defend myself, but the thought crossed my mind to kill her. I could do this without noise, without blood. By the time they realized she was missing, by the time they would found her, we'd be far down the road, but that wasn't reasonable. Where would I hide the body in this empty maze of stone walls and corridors? "Stop, or I'll tell them you tried to touch me," she threatened. "I'll say you tried to strip me, that you laid hands on my sacred womb. You think they won't believe me? Do you know what they'll do to you? Go away, leave. Master touches my head and knows everything. He always knows." She hesitated. Who knew what was possible in these times? Maybe my priest was really also a knower. "Shh," she said warmly, touching her finger to my lips. "Quiet now. I'll be good to you. You don't understand anything. When I allow it, it's okay to touch. The goddess is pleased, don't you see?" She reached out again and found the loosened gap in my pants. She pushed me in the chest, making me lie on my back. Her fingers were strangely skilled for an adept who was supposed to despise men. She knew exactly what she was doing, and once again I felt that unsettling familiarity. "This is just so we can sleep better," she whispered. "Your master won't be back for a while. He's witnessing the harmony of unity now. Calm down. There. Oh, yes." She looked at me, her eyelids narrowing again. I suddenly jerked, my eyes wide, and threw my whole body into bizarre convulsions. She leapt back, watching in shock and horror as I flailed on the carpet like a terrified fish. I slammed my face into my own knee. Then, screaming, I began banging my head against the wall as if trying to punish myself for something. Not too hard, enough to break my nose and smear blood across my face, but not enough to actually pass out. I turned over the table, sending balls clattering across the floor. The lamp fell into a puddle of sauce and, luckily, went out. I let out a guttural roar, unlike any human sound, choking as if I clutched my throat and pounded my hand against the cushions. I even managed to foam at the mouth and let it dribble down my lips. The girl was watching me for a moment, her pale face a mix of disgust and fear. I saw her slowly backing away on all fours towards the exit. Finally, she grabbed her basket and fled. At last, I was alone. For some time longer, I kept making various wild noises, thrashing about in the alcove, but eventually I rasped and went quiet, as if I had weakened. I only listened. I knew that if the adept returned to switch the packages, hoping I had fainted, I would have to kill her without doubt. Because I had remembered. I did recognize her. Or, at least, I thought I did. It seemed almost impossible, but if I wasn't mistaken, I knew that if I stayed with her even a moment longer, if I looked into her eyes, if I touched her, she would recognize me too. To both her and my own doom. Mira, the concubine with whom my teacher and lover Aina, my only Aina, had commanded me to spend the night for a passionate struggle, ages ago. Mira, who had been meant to test how much I had learned. Centuries ago, in a distant city, in the pavilion of a palace complex called the Village of Clouds. A young prince and her, beautiful, dark-skinned like a Kabiric princess. She had shaved her red hair, traded the gauzy, mist-like fabrics for the coarse cloth of an adept's robes, removed the delicate chains from her ankles and wrists, tattooed her cheeks, hands, and forehead with the sacred symbols, and grown significantly thinner, but she still had those same emerald eyes, the same lips, and the same hands that I still remember. I sat on the bedding, wiping blood from my nose with a scrap of cloth, feeling my heart pounding with terror, excitement, and effort. In my lower belly there was a sharp pain of unfulfilled desire, and I could feel my battered head throbbing. I hoped I was wrong, that maybe it was just someone similar, perhaps a relative, but I knew I was just trying to fool myself. There are things you don't forget. Time can wash away thoughts like rain. It can even erase things that once meant the world, but the caress and gazes of lovers remain, especially the kind of caresses Mira had given, and that gaze, her lips, her eyes, and her fingers. I was certain. I sat and listened until morning. The deep, black night of the labyrinth carried sounds, whispers or footsteps, but when I peeked out of the alcove, I saw no one. I fell asleep briefly, but the slightest whistle of wind or cry of a bird woke me instantly. For good measure, I moved the casket, trying not to touch it except through a cloth, and placed it so that it would be impossible to reach it unnoticed while I slept. Still, I slept little and very lightly. Home returned only in the morning. He crawled into the alcove and sat against the wall, rubbing his arms as if shivering from the cold. He was very pale, and there was a swollen, purple bite mark on his shoulder. He looked at me, but touched his fist to his lips before I could say anything. He sat still, and I could see he was fighting exhaustion. His head kept dropping to his knees, only for him to wake up after a moment, just like me. At dawn, they brought us a bucket of water for washing, a little vegetable porridge, and even slightly sweet nut cookies. Everything was brought to me by the bald old man. Mira did not appear. We packed our things in silence. I had no idea what had happened in Arkmatron's chamber. The only thing that came to mind was that if Hone had killed her, as common sense suggested, he would have returned during the night. Besides, he wasn't urging us to hurry. After breakfast, he put on his mask and spoke to me only in short commands, like those given to a dog. Most of the time, he just pointed at things. As soon as we had wrapped the casket and straightened our robes, the same priest of indeterminate gender who had led us the previous night appeared. The Arkmatron sends a basket of fruit for your journey and wishes the path on which the word travels be blessed by the blessings of the underground mother. They recite. May the mother watch over this tower and all those who seek shelter in its shadow. Hone replied, speaking in a human voice for the first time that day. We were escorted to the outer courtyard. I walked in silence, feeling my heart pounding in my throat. At any moment, I expected to see a temple guard, a wall of round shields bearing the image of the underground womb, and spears. At times, I was certain they would be led by Mirach, at others by the Archmatron, or both. Sometimes, I imagined they would simply be waiting for us at the gate. Instead, I saw our cart with a repaired axle, harnessed to the same animals. Holm climbed onto the seat, kneeling on the leather cushions, and with a flick of his finger ordered me to open the large parcel for him. I did as he commanded, glancing at the back of the cart and noticing that our baskets, the spice sticks, and bundles of clothes lay just as we had left them. I grabbed the reins and the long reed. Then we stood in silence for a long time, waiting. I heard the grinding of bolts, and finally the gates opened, letting in the sunlight. I prodded the onagas with a reed, and the two-wheeled cart rolled forward, and we left for the city, once again heading toward the bridge. As I walked, I tilted my face towards the sun, feeling as though it had been offered to me anew. Even the crowded, foul-smelling square, the miserable alleyways, and the crooked huts of Sheridan seemed beautiful to me. Yet I knew it was way too early to celebrate. We trundled through the city, and wherever our cart appeared, people knelt, pressing their fists to the ground. I walked on, not once looking back at the looming red tower dominating the area. This time, there weren't many people under the bridge. The soldiers, however, stood in the exactly same positions as the day before. I glanced at the wagons loaded with the shields blocking the stone bridge, and felt again as if a coiled snake had settled in my throat. "Not a word!" came Holmes' voice, rasping from beneath the mask. At the table sat a different officer than the day before. His head wrapped in a scarf. He sipped water from a flask, his legs casually prodded up on the table. There were only a few people in line, some lone traveler, a family with several children, and an old man leaning on a stick. There wasn't yet a crowd of detained travelers by the wall near the bridge, for now only 3 travelers knelt there with their hands clasped on their heads. A soldier with a spear kept watching over them, lounging on a barrel and munching a piece of fruit. The others loitered around the square or sat in the shade by the wall, making a noisy racket as they played dice. Among them stood a leather-wrapped girl, and the soldiers passed around a clay pipe, carelessly blowing out clouds of backroom smoke. I thought it would take nothing more than a home of cavalry to scatter them like dust, and not much more to take the whole city. But what then? When we reached the first checkpoint, the commander was just finishing a conversation with a family huddled together in a fearful group. The man and woman were nervously searching inside their clothes, and beside the table stood a large basket like ones used to carry bread. Inside, there were already a variety of items: an ornamental knife in a wooden sheath, a handful of copper coins, some turtle-shell decorated boxes, bits of cheap jewelry, and colorful cloth. The travelers were either paying a toll or surrendering banned items, because I also saw 2 metal-adorned gourds, the kind used to carry palm wine on the road, and a fine pipe made of silver and expensive wood in the basket. The woman, her head covered by a scarf, trembling as she fought back tears, unwrapped a small bundle and took out the 2 tiny silver earrings set with crystal stones. The commander inspected them with disdain before tossing them into the basket and motioning with his head for them to pass between the wagons. Before anyone had a chance to kneel in the dust upon seeing this, the lone traveler had already passed through the wagons. A tall man in a worn raincoat, carrying a staff over his shoulders, with his face hidden by the brim of a white traveler's hat. He wore the robe of a Sindar, but his posture and demeanor reminded me of a Kyrene. He threw a handful of new iron nails into a basket and headed toward the old woman. This time, we did not have to explain ourselves or argue. Our cart, our ropes, and the looming shadow of a tower trailing behind us were enough. Home didn't even have time to reach for the pendant hanging around his neck. The cart rolled onto the other side of the bridge, giving us passage. But we had barely taken a few steps when a shout rang out. First, a hoarse screech of the old woman, then the sound of running feet and commotion. As soon as I heard her screech, I nearly fainted, certain she was going on about me. But in the next moment, I saw her lunging at the tall man, grabbing his clothes, reaching for his face with knotted fingers curled like claws, her long yellowed nails hooked like a bird's talons. The traveler broke free and fled in desperation, running toward the other side of the river, straight into the path of two more wagons. "Sin! Oppressor! Oppressor!" the knower screamed, her voice like the cry of a jay. One of the riders from the pursuit group leaped onto his horseback, not in the usual way, but by standing on the saddle with ease, as if he had simply jumped onto a table. Still in midair, he ripped the bow from his back, already holding an arrow in his other hand. With a complicated movement, he swirled them both in the air and swiftly, without aiming, shot from the hip, holding the bow flat. The fleeing man collapsed to the ground with a feathered shaft sticking out of his nape, but he immediately pulled his legs and stood up shakily, stubbornly continuing toward the other side of the bridge, toward the two remaining wagons. The herder on the other side rested his foot on the side of the wagon and also shot, with the same quick, thoughtless movement. The man stopped mid-step, swayed, and a tiny bloody dot and a flash of steel appeared on his woven cloak. The bowstring of a soldier standing next to us on the saddle twanged, and soon another arrow whistled from the wagons on the opposite side. Yet the man kept walking. He stood for a moment, then broke the arrow protruding from his chest, reached behind him to grab a fletching, and pulled out the second one. Two more arrows pierced him immediately afterward. The archer standing on the saddle chuckled. It looked as if the bowmen were playing a game, seeing who could finally bring him down. But the man kept moving. Drenched in blood, bristling with shafts sticking out in all directions with the purple fletching, holding the broken tip in his hand. I couldn't take my eyes off him, silently praying that he would make it to that wagon, that he would manage at least that much. But just a few steps later, the traveler took two more arrows and suddenly collapsed onto the stone bridge. He tried to push himself up, but finally went limp, and I understood that he had won. No one would drag him to the tower. No one would cut him open, naked amidst the smoke and wails, with a stone knife, and no one would feed his blood to the ancient statue. The old woman wheezed heavily, her breath raspy, and an adept supported her arm. Another one carried a stool. "Fools!" the crone rasped. "Is blood due for the mother? You've wasted his blood. Then the knower heard the rumble of our cart's wheels and raised her hand. I stared straight ahead, avoiding her blind eyes covered with a golden haze. The old woman jerked away from the adepts, feeling her way forward, and began sniffing the air. She craned her neck like a dog, her nostrils blaring as if she were trying to catch a scent. The archer from the other side of the bridge approached the fallen man and nudged him lightly with his boot. He knelt and touched the corpse, then stood up, turned toward us, and ran his head across his throat in a cutting motion. I knew what was coming. Home remained seated like a puppet, while the old woman had already found her direction and was coming toward us. "The hand, the eye of a mother." "Stop!" a voice shouted. I turned to look. I saw the Archmatron. She sat in a litter, accompanied by 4 armed temple guards with shields and armor. I felt a strange, hysterical laugh bubbling up in my throat. It filled me slowly, like water, and soon it would have to spill out. What else? Was this bridge cursed or what? "Stop!" The shout came again, even though everyone was already standing still. "Oppressor!" the knower howled. I sense evil. I sense selfishness, greed. I feel hatred. I smell blood for the mother. Enough! The Archmatron's litter was being carried toward us, and I could already see the faces of the temple guards. I decided that I would meet the same end as the traveler who reminded me of Kirenen. They would not drag me to the floor of the statue. They wouldn't take my heart, my blood, or my bones. I would not feed their mother. I would die in a mad dash towards the wagons on the other side. I slowed slightly, so that I would have time to reach for the sword hidden in the walking staff lying at the back of a cart, if it came to that. The Archmatron suddenly screamed at her bearers, ordering them to set the litter down. Everyone around, soldiers and travelers alike, were already kneeling with their foreheads pressed to the ground. The priestess disentangled herself from the muslin curtains and strode toward us, her red cloak billowing, her face disappearing into the shadows. "Enough of this madness!" she shouted. "You cannot stop the messenger! You've had enough, oppressors!" "Silence! I can feel it! I am the eye of the mother! You know that I'm never wrong! He is there! I can smell his stench! Don't you dare stand in my way! It's me who finds them, I know! You know I am the watchful one! The mother does not err!" "Go!" the Archmatron barked over her shoulder at us. "Quickly!" Then she turned and yelled again at the crone. "Stop saying I! You know what that word means! Stop cursing!" And so we left, the 2 of them screaming at each other like peacocks, surrounded by the kneeling people. The hoofs clattered on the cobblestones, the wheels turned with a rumble, and the river roared below, churning with foam. "He is marked! He is the bearer of fate!" I heard from behind. It was the old woman screaming. But she wasn't talking about home, as the priestess likely thought. She meant me. I was the marked one. I was the fate bearer, whatever that meant. First, we passed the traveler's hut lying on the ground, painted with light resin, then the trail of small bloodstains, and at the end of it lay the man. His face was pale, smeared with blood, and suddenly he seemed to look like my father. I turned my gaze away. One of the wagons was pushed aside, the donkey's hooves hit the road, and the wheels rolled off the bridge. The river, the city, and the tower were behind us. We were back on the trail, heading east. Holm still lounged on the seat under the parasol, never removing his mask from his face, while I walked beside the cart with my cane and a view of the donkey's rumps. He was still the priest, and I was still the adept. Pimpled Agiren, whom I was already sick of. If I could, I would kill him for a second time. I longed to tear off those robes and find some water to wash away the dust, sweat, and fear clinging to me. The trail was deserted. It rose gently amongst the rocks, and small trees were sparse, more shrubs with hard, tiny leaves and branches white like ash, bristling with large thorns. There was no one else, just our cart, birds circling in the sky, the sun, and the rusty dust of the road. "What happened on the bridge?" I asked. It felt like I hadn't spoken normally in ages. Silence was the only answer. The figure on the cart stared ahead, as if I didn't exist. We rolled on for a few more steps. "I want to know what happened last night and today on the bridge," I repeated more loud. Nothing. I tossed the cane onto the cart. Holm rose indignantly from the cushions and turned toward me, the gleaming, insect-like mask facing my direction. "Give me the water," I demanded. The mask shimmered like a mirror, darkness luring in its slits. "Too close to quench first," he scolded me sternly. His words were spoken plainly, without the pompous intonation of a unity speech, but still, the sentence he structured was precisely that way. I went to the back of the cart and grabbed the spy stick, twisting the ring with one movement and pulling on the handle disguised as wood. The gleaming blade hissed like an angry snake as it slid out of its sheath, shining in the sun. I looked at the weapon in my hand, and suddenly I felt human again. In Kiranese poetry, a sword is sometimes called a fate-turner. "Give me water, son of Warmuther," I commanded sharply, "and lift that mask. I want to see your face. Now, water and mask, or I swear you'll be dead in a moment." He stared at me from behind the mask, kneeling motionless on the leather cushions, as if he didn't understand what I was saying. "Agira Ascaro!" I barked suddenly in Kiranese. That's an order, soldier." He flinched, as if I had struck him. Neither one of us had heard our native tongue in what felt like ages. Even in the palace, it was used only on special occasions. "Agira!" I repeated, a little louder, but with an even firmer tone, the kind used by commanders. Not a shout, not like a sergeant in an infantry camp. Like an emperor, irritated by the disobedience. "Colonel!" "I obey." He suddenly snapped from behind the mask and lifted it. And underneath, I saw the face of a madman. Holm was pale, drenched in sweat, his eyes gleaming feverishly, staring at me with a crazed, idiotic smile twitching nervously at his lips. His entire face twitched, as if he were about to burst into a laughter or tears. I tightened my sweaty grip on the wooden hilt. "Ishida Taraino! Off the cart!" I hissed through clenched teeth. He jumped off onto the road, staring at me with that wild look, his face contorting into bizarre grimaces. I had the feeling that a demon had taken residence inside him, struggling now to escape. I was certain that in a moment he would lunge at me. I felt like I was standing in front of a massive, battle-crazed leopard, ready to strike at any second. That is why I didn't change my stance, didn't raise my sword. If I had assumed a fighting pose, Home would have sensed my fear, so I stood tall, looking at him with authority. We stood like that for a moment, looking at each other. I let an expression of barely contained anger surface on my face and raised the sword slightly. Not to a fighting pose, but as if it were a stick I intended to scold a dog with. Then Home began to tremble, as if he were shivering. He unbuckled the straps, took off the mask, and let it drop to the ground. Then he collapsed onto his knees, driving his fists into the rusty dust of the road, and bowed his head. Agiru Kano, kodai massa tohimon. I am obedient. I am obedient. I beg forgiveness. He spoke Kiranese strangely, as though the words were reluctant to pass through his throat, but the bow he offered me was an Amitrachi one, submissive, far from the dignity of Kiranese military customs. He lifted his face, revealing a wide, foolish grin, but his eyes were filled with despair. Matagei, enough, I said. The last thing we needed was for someone to come and see, a priest bowing humbly to another. We were still on the road, not far from the caste settlement. Give me water, I said more calmly. He stood up, reached for the cart and pulled out a water skin. I drank a few sips, then handed the bag back to Home and told him to drink. I doubted cold liquid would be enough to bring him back to his senses. Whatever was happening to my companion was terrifying. He had either lost his mind completely, or was being eaten away by some strange illness. I had no idea what to do next. Around the wound on his shoulder there was an ugly, purplish swelling size of a gold dirham. What's wrong with you? I asked. Home still trembled as he gulped down the water. Is it from the sting? He shook his head. No, yes, it is not known. Forgive me, Tohimon. In such situations, one thinks in the old language. It's hard to speak normally. I beg forgiveness. Agiru Kano. Not good. Get on guard, I said. We need to keep moving until we find a remote place to get rid of those damned priest disguises. It's best if you sleep. Don't put the mask back on, but keep it nearby in case we run into someone. The sun was beating down on my battered and sloppily shaved head. Flies buzzed, the river murmured, and a small bird hovered in the air, beating its wings while letting out a monotonous, silvery trill. Every now and then it would dive down, only to rise again and hover high, singing its song. I slowed my pace. That bird was a honey-eater. They always behave this way when they are trying to scare off a predator from very young. Perhaps a fox or a venomous lizard was sneaking towards its nest tucked in a crevice between the rocks. Perhaps. But I didn't feel like stepping into the rocky corridor, only to emerge on the other side, squeezed between the cliff and the precipice. The honey-eater kept chirping as if its throat was about to burst. Somewhere in the ravine a lone stone fell. It shot sharply, bouncing over rocks, rattling across the gravel. Nothing moved. Then I saw a brief flash at the top of a rock, just a spark, a tiny glint of sunlight reflected off a mica or crystal fragment, or of polished steel. I snapped the reins, urging the animals to suddenly lurch into a run, and immediately yanked the harness hard to the left. One donkey nearly reared up, Over tried to turn on the spot, and everything got tangled. Legs, straps, the yoke, the draft balls. The onagers collapsed helplessly. The two-wheeled cart tipped over with a crash, scattering its load and tossing a dazed cone onto the road right beside me. But I'd achieved what I wanted. The heaps of overturned harnesses, the piercing brace of the trapped animals, and the toppled cart, now helplessly spinning a wheel in the air, created an instant barricade in front of us. The first arrow struck just as the cart was tipping over, embedding itself in the bulging side of one of the onagers. The animal let out a horrible trumpet-like scream, and two more arrows thudded into the cart's floorboards, while another zipped past my head with a sharp buzz like a steel hornet. We did not have bows in our luggage, not that they would have helped much. Home was struggling to rise, shaking his head, blood streaming down his face and dripping onto the road. More arrows struck the sides of the flailing animals, now caught in the torn harnesses. I crawled to grab the spy staff and pulled it towards me. I drew the sword, releasing the blade from the other end of the staff, turning it into a spear. Home, too, was crawling across the rusty stones, leaving a trail of blood from his split head. But instead of reaching for a weapon, he was clutching the silver mask of a priest. Another arrow ricocheted off a rock right next to the cat. The shaft splintered into a burst of shards, transforming it into a strange flower. It seemed Home wouldn't be of any use for the moment. He put on the mask, and I could hear him muttering a litany to the underground mother. Meanwhile, they were running. I could see them leaping down from the rocks, charging towards the cart with unsheathed swords. I heard the pounding of heavy, military sandals. 3 of them. They were just a dozen paces away when another 3 emerged from the ravine, 2 of them with bows and 1 more trailing behind. These didn't run, but simply marched toward us, the archers already with arrows drawn on the strings. These were not the curved, glued bows of herders, but ordinary hunting weapons. I noticed that all of the attackers wore various traveling clothes, mostly in the color of middle castes. So, 2 archers and 4 foot soldiers, against me on my own. Home lay cowed on the ground. She who gives everything to herself and takes everything herself, I heard. I couldn't run and leave him here. They would catch up with me quickly anyway. On this barren wasteland, the archers would only need a moment to toy with me. My only chance was the barricade of the overturned cart and the fact that they weren't expecting resistance. Whoever they were, they intended to attack a traveling priest and an adept. 2 defenseless travelers. I sheathed the sword inside the staff and decided to fight with a stick. Let the spy staff become what it's meant to be, a series of deadly surprises. Let my opponents find out I had a sword only when it was already buried in their guts. I managed to tear off a shattered and torn parasol from its frame and plant it on the ground, kneeling behind it, ready, the staff tucked under my arm. I could hear them shouting as they ran. I could hear the gravel crunching under the soles of their heavy leather sandals. I allowed the fire in my soul to ignite again. I threw everything full of dark energy into it, like rags soaked in oil or resinous kindling. The memory of Maranhar, the fire devouring the village of clouds, blooded paws shaking my hyena's head, naked people crammed into the pen, fodder for the underground mother, fleeting, flickering moments like sparks. Let it burn, let it roar, and then let it flow through my veins. I had to awaken the tiger within me. I am now a tiger cub. I always have been. I, the fiery banner, lord of a tiger throne, Kai Tohimon of a crane clan. I felt the fire filling me, roaring in my head, shooting from my eyes, flaring my nostrils, lifting my upper lip. I felt the tiger fangs growing in my jaw. I heard them shouting to each other. "The old man's lying here, his head smashed. Don't see the little one. Find the chest." A voice called from a distance, and I recognized it as Mira's, the adept who might have been Mira. And then someone struck the parasol under which I was crouching with a sword. And then was when I let the fire explode. I shot out from my hiding place like a coiled viper. The staff whistled through the air as I leapt, striking the soldier from above on the wrist, bone cracking. My feet hit the ground amidst his scream. The other end of the staff slammed into his throat, and he fell backward onto my hip, flipping over and crashing to the ground in a cloud of dust. The second one leapt at me, sword raised to his temple, blade forward, and shoulder thrust in the stance of someone used to hiding behind a shield. I twisted the ring, the blade clipped from the rear, and I swung the stick, which had now become a spear. He dodged, slashed. I parried with a shaft and kicked him in the knee. He dodged again. We parried, the blades crashed, and we jumped apart. His hand was cut. Blood began dripping onto the dusty cloud our feet had kicked up. We started circling each other like dogs. All of it lasted just a split second, a strange, elongated moment in time. The one I had knocked down didn't even manage to get up yet, and the third one, kneeling over home with sword in hand, looked at us in astonishment but was already leaping toward me. I could see his mouth open in a scream, and I heard Home muttering into his mask, "Oppressors, points of broken word, the marvel's wrath." We leapt at each other again, suddenly and viciously. His sword clanged against the hardwood. Sword slash, block, spear thrust, dodge, slash, dodge. It was like someone was suddenly playing the Kabiric drums, fast and wild, in the strange frenzied rhythm of the desert warrior's dance. And then, silence again. The third man jumped at me but froze mid-leap, grabbed by Home, who lay on the ground clutching his belt. They tumbled to the ground together, Home roaring prayers as if they were curses. We circled each other again. My opponent had a broad, weathered face, with a scar snaking across his cheek and chin. His torn shirt revealed a tattooed chest, streaked with blood from a shallow wound. His eyes were like elongated drops of congealed tar. He no longer assumed an infantry stance. He circled me, crouching on his bent legs, holding his blade forward like a knife. This was a veteran of back alleys, seedy taverns and gambling dens. He had fought in dozens of skirmishes, but not with a sword and not against someone wielding a spear. The first one I had felt was starting to stand up, shaking his head and choking, one hand clutching his throat. The archers were already closing in. I could hear the thudding of their sandals just beyond the guards. They had realized things weren't going as smoothly as they would have. And then all I could hear were the drums playing on the neatly trimmed training courtyard, the calm voice of the master of war, and banners fluttering in the spring breeze, polished shafts in hand, and the sound of drums, the war dance. I stopped thinking. My body knew what to do. The spear lifted, spun in my hands, and came alive. It was a part of me. My body danced to the rhythm of the drums, which were long gone. They burned with a palace, far from here, long time ago. But still, I could hear them inside me. My feet pounded the ground, the shaft spun in my hands, the stance of a horse, the swallow's cut, third step, spiral jump, thrust, all in the blink of an eye. I came to, standing in a cloud of dust, in a low stance of flowing water, which a spear has tucked under my arm, its blade pointing somewhere behind me. My face was splattered with blood, but I felt no pain. I couldn't move a spear. It felt as if someone was holding it. The one standing before me suddenly dropped his sword and walked away, stiffly, awkwardly, like a puppet, as if he had just decided to go home. He grabbed the edge of an overturned cart and collapsed over it, rolling to the ground. He clutched a blanket tightly to himself, and a fountain of frothy blood shot from his neck. The drums grew quieter. I took a step forward and turned, pulling the dropped spear, which came free with a crunch. The second attacker collapsed where he stood, soft and limp like a wet shell. Nearby, another fought with Home. Soaked with sweat and panting, he swung his sword, slashing and thrusting, but Home danced away, dodging, and the blade cut through empty air. It looked like a swordsman was trying to swat a flying wasp. But Home held only the iron symbol of a scorpentine in front of him, and hoarsely shouted an ode to the armorer. The mask sat crooked on his head, the metal under his eye dented from the blow, but it seemed to have saved him. I hadn't managed a single step before I heard the creaking of bowstrings. "Drop the spear!" I heard Mirach's voice. 2 arrows were pointed straight at my face. I could almost feel the sharp touch of the arrowheads. For a moment, everyone froze. The one who had been fighting Home approached him, yanked off his mask, and raised his sword horizontally, aiming directly at his throat. "Stop!" The other back. She was wearing a cinder-on travel's outfit and a drab hooded cloak. Her shaven head was wrapped in a scarf. "That fab killed Księga," said the archer, his voice trembling strangely, drawing the arrow back to his rear. The bow cracked slightly. "My brother is dead! I told you, if we raise hands against the priest, there will be disaster." "Hara!" she snapped. "Precious Mondogs! The mother's blessing is with us." "I can see that," he muttered. "The spear lives in his hands, O enlightened one." "Drop the spear!" she repeated. I looked at the man holding the sword at Home's throat, still gripping the iron scorpion. My companion stood motionless, and suddenly he seemed old to me. There was no way out, but my fingers refused to obey. If I let go of a weapon now, I would cease to be human again. I would become an animal, one that could be slaughtered without consequence. A bleeding, desperate sheep. My fingers were like they were forged from steel. I forced myself to loosen my grip, as if I were bending iron bars. And eventually, I dropped the spear. It fell straight onto the tip of my boot. If I had just a little more time, barely a flicker, a speed of an arrow, I would have had enough to move my foot and grab the shaft again. The spear, the stick, the sword, the chain, the whole armor hidden within carved wood. But I had no such moment. "Kick the spear, Agiren," Mirach ordered. "Just lightly." There was no choice. I nudged the shaft with the tip of my boot and let it roll a little ways away. I could still feel the touch of the arrowhead on my face. "Where's the box?" Mirach asked. If you hand it over, we'll let you go free." Oh, she still thought I was just a village idiot. "Oh, enlightened one, but Księga," the archer said, his voice cracking. "Hara, where's the box, Agiren? You don't want us to kill your master, do you?" I sniffed noisily and pointed shakily behind me. Hidden in the cart." "Where?" I turned slowly, hearing both bowstrings creak. I already knew how I would die, pierced by arrows, just like the traveler on the bridge. I found the metal latches hidden beneath the driver's seat and a clever wooden pin. The panel fell, revealing the bundle turned on its side. "Take it out," she commanded. "You take it out, Mira," I replied slowly. She froze, her eyes wide, her lips parted in astonishment. Suddenly, she slapped the archer's hand, forcing him to lower his bow. "What did you say?" She took 2 long strides toward me. "Who are you?" she asked, confused, reaching out to lift my face. It was one swift move, as quick as a snake's stride. I grabbed her wrist, twisted her arm behind her back, and pulled her close, pressing her throat with my other forearm. I bent backward slightly, lifting her, pinning her legs with my knee. She tried to kick, but each attempt to make her choke, and the twisted arm sent searing pain through her. She had no choice but to stand on her toes, helplessly clawing the arm and squeezing her throat. A stunned silence fell, broken only by Mira's gasping breath. "Tell them to lower their bows," I whispered into her ear. "Let her go, or I kill the old man," the guard with his swords at Holmes' throat screamed. "Pigs of a broken word," Holmes roared. "Lower your bows," I shouted, "or I'll strangle her." I let her put her feet on the ground and loosened my grip. I heard the hiss of the air as she took a breath, followed by a fit of coughing. "Kill him!" she rasped. I pressed her lower back with my hip and tightened my hold again. She clawed at my arm, struggling harder. One of the archers lowered his bow, but the other, the one who had lost his brother, still had me in his sights. He moved to the side, trying to find a clear shot, but I turned Mira, using her as a shield. In the sudden quiet, I heard a faint click as Holmes let go of the scorpentine amulet, which hung now from the chain wrapped around his fingers. Mira kicked desperately, thrashing her whole body. The archer in front of me raised his bow uncertainly. Then, several things happened at once. I heard a whoosh, and Holmes' scorpentine flashed as a blur of steel. His priestly robe flared as he became a whirlwind. A scream echoed, and the guard's sword flew into the air. The archer flanking me turned his head just for a moment to see what had happened. Holmes' chain became a flurry of lightning strikes. An arrow pierced through Mira's shoulder and cut my temple just above the eye. I dropped her, pushing her straight into the arms of a second archer. As she fell, she grabbed onto his coat, and I was already lunging. One moment, that was all it took. Mira fell at the man's feet. I pulled him down toward me, tripping over her body. His hand jabbed at my throat. I hooked my arm under his elbow, and we grappled like enraged dogs. He was older than me, and far stronger than I was. He had spent half his life in brutal brawls on the Empire's desolate roads. I had grown in the peace and luxury of the House of Steel. But I had my Master of War and the knowledge of generations of Kiranese warriors. All the dirty tricks to help a weaker opponent survive against a stronger one. And I had older brother, stronger than me and crueler than all the bandits and temple guards put together. The man pinned me down with his entire body, wrapping his arm around my neck in the dangerous hold-called collar. If the enemy was fast and stronger, it was almost impossible to escape from it. My right hand was trapped underneath. I hit him under the ribs with my left hand, but it didn't help much. He had loosened his grip slightly, and I realized he was reaching for a knife at his belt. I threw my arm over his choking arm and reached for his eyes. My fingers carved in close, and I ripped at his face as if it were a mask. He howled, and I managed to free my pinned right hand, driving it into his crotch and crushing his testicles. I flipped him onto his back, with my leg locked around his neck. He stabbed blindly with his knife, but I blocked the blow and tightened my thighs with all my strength. I felt him strain in my grip, ready to break free. Then I saw Holmes' legs. He stepped on the man's hand, pried the knife loose, knelt, and plunged the blade into his ribs. I heard a scream and a gargle, followed by my own cry as the dying man convulsively sank his teeth into my thigh. He died, his jaws crushing my leg, and I thrashed like my thigh was being devoured by a tiger. Holmes finally pried his mouth open with the flat side of a blade and freed me. I stood up with difficulty and loosened my trousers. The bite was shallow, with only a few small punctures where the teeth had broken the skin, but a large, red-purple bruise was already foaming. I had never felt such pain before. My vision darkened, and I thought I might collapse. Mira was fleeing. She wasn't running full speed, but stumbling, staggering, her shoulder still pierced by the arrow. Leaning against the overturned cart, I vomited from the pain and exhaustion. Around us lay 5 twisted corpses of temple guards, the blood-splattered red road barely distinguishable from the crimson dust. Meanwhile, Mira was fleeing, clutching the iron box in her arms. The bow of a man I had thought was broken, but the other one lay nearby on the ground. Still coughing, I pointed at the retreating girl. She recognized me. She had the box. She had lost her people. She couldn't be allowed to return to the tower. She had already gotten quite far, when Holmes gently reached out and took the bow from me. He pulled out an arrow, taking his time, running the fletching across his lips as if kissing the feathers. He pulled an arrow, taking his time, running the fletching across his lips as if kissing the feathers, then drew the bow and fired almost without aiming. He missed. The arrow whizzed just above her head and buried itself in a distant hill. I heard a curse, and a moment later, Holmes drew the string again. The arrow burst through the air and struck her in the back. Mira cried out and froze, her body stiffening, but she didn't drop the box or fall. The body I once kissed. She tried to keep going, now awkwardly, barely placing her weakening legs, that once said. Suddenly, she sat down on the ground and hunched over. I thought she was collapsing, but I saw her hands pulling the strings and then struggling with the lock of the chest. "She's opening the box," I said in disbelief. "Quick!" Holmes shouted, pulling me with him to the other side of the cart. We fell behind the bodies of the onagers. One was dead, the other still struggling and snorting, blood spurting from its mouth. I peeked out from behind the animals just in time to see that Mira had failed to open the box. Her weakening, blood-stained fingers slipped helplessly over the iron latch, her head drooping. At that moment, Holmes grabbed me by the neck and yanked me to the ground. "Stay down!" he yelled in outrage as the flash hit us. Like a sudden, blue flash of lightning, a burst of mercury-colored light, and a strange, soundless impact, like hundreds of ant bites on the skin. I curled up, bracing for the thunder, but I didn't hear it. Just a shimmering glow that soon disappeared, leaving behind a pulsing bubble of disturbed air, which suddenly burst and expanded in all directions, unleashing a hurricane's blast. The wind crashed down on us with a roar of an avalanche, burying us in clouds of dust, hurling rocks as if they were dry leaves. The gust pushed out tangled animals we were hiding behind. The body of one of the guards flew overhead, and the cart clattered back onto its wheels. Then silence fell. Only the lights seemed strange, as if a storm were approaching. I raised myself slightly and saw that above the dying Mira, A ring of dark clouds was forming in the sky, concentric, slowly rotating circles the color of ash and lead, streaked with lightning. In the middle of them, a black hole appeared, like an enormous eye. On the ground, I saw a swirling column of red dust rising higher and higher. Neither Mirach nor the box was visible, and where she had died, everything was white as if scorched. I also noticed the suddenly great birds, hanging motionless around, as if someone had suspended them in the air. Then the earth began to collapse. With a rumble and rustling, it sank into a hole that appeared out of nowhere, rapidly expanding until a round crater, several strides wide, formed. "It's over now," I said to home. "Better not look there. Do things change their nature?" "A strange cloud appeared," I said. Then the rain started. The rain was warm and red, like blood. Home struggled to his feet. "Let's get out of here. Can you walk?" "I can," I replied, "but only slowly. My leg hurts badly." The cloud brought an unnatural darkness and a strange, icy, stifling air. We grabbed our spice sticks and baskets, donned our travel hats, and covered ourselves with raincoats, which immediately became streaked with red stains. And then we left, trying not to look back. The rain rained heavily but didn't last long, just like during a storm. It stopped soon after, but we kept walking, limping and leaning on our sticks. We marched on until the dark, swirling cloud was far behind us. After a long while, the sun shone again. "If she had managed to open the box, we wouldn't have survived." Home finally spoke. "What was that?" I asked, relieved that he was speaking normally again. "They say it's the name of a goddess," he said grimly, "but I think it's just cursed earth from the charm spots. They do, or at least they want to. They want to perform miracles like the prophetess, every tower, and every priestess. What you've just seen was the birth of a charm spot. That's why I think we can rest now and hide the priest's clothes. It seems no one will be able to travel this road for a long time." We found a suitable spot sheltered by rocks atop a small hill, and gratefully put down our baskets. The bloodstains on our woven reed raincoats had dried, leaving only a fine, rusty dust. "Look," I showed Home. "It's not blood. The wind just mixed the road dust with rain." Home glanced at my fingers and shook his head. It looked like the chills were coming back. "I'll make a fire," he said. "We'll burn the priest's clothes." I happily stripped off the pants and coat of a pimpled Agiran of Kesatim. I hope to never hear of him again. I went down to the river to wash, wearing only a loincloth and carrying a bundle that contained the yellow robe of a Sindar. I also brought my spice stick. I decided I wouldn't let go of it from now on. I found a round cove full of stones, surrounded by bushes, and with the light, I submerged myself in the cool water. I didn't have a soapboard, nor even oil or lye, just the water brought me relief. It soothed my muscles, washed away the sweat. Only the bite on my thigh still ached sharply, as if a guard had been venomous. The wounds no longer bled, but the skin around them was swollen and blackened. Cold water, however, could work wonders. Sure, I would have preferred a clean Kiranese bath with polished stone or wooden basins filled with warm, fragrant water. But years in the House of Steel had made me accustomed to ice-cold baths, and it made a little difference to me at this point. I was already getting dressed when I suddenly heard a splash of water. I froze with my belt in hand, wearing only my pants and boots. Very quietly I crouched down, reaching for the stick. The splash repeated. Either some animal had entered the river nearby, or a boat was floating by. "I'm Goldie," someone called out. "I'm harmless and I'm fishing. No need to beat me with a stick. The stick is not necessary." "Show yourself," I replied, standing up slowly. The bow of a dugout canal appeared from the rocks, a small hand gripping the edge. A moment later, a boat slipped into the cove. Crouching in it was a wrinkled, skinny little man with sunburned brown skin. He wore only a loincloth. I took a step back, propping my stick against a rock for quick access, then put on my shirt and coat. It took just a moment, and I didn't take eyes off the fisherman. The wind had died down, and I had the feeling no one else was around. "What do you want, Goldie?" "I'm here legally. May all become one. I'm just heading to a village with some fish or enlightened Sindar." "And what do you need fish for, Goldie? Don't you know that the mother forbids eating the bodies of the children of the earth? Which caste are you from?" "Who said anything about eating? I don't eat bodies. I only gather water cabbage and breadfruit roots, and I give it all to the temple, as the law says. I use fish to weigh down the algae so the wind don't blow them away." "Does the enlightened Sindar want a fish? For a copper coin?" "I don't need fish, Goldie, and I'm a poor traveler. Release the fish. It also wants to live. Don't you know that trading is a sin?" Oh, enlightened one, I don't trade. I'm no merchant. I'm Goldie, I said it. And I'm a Karahim. May all become one. I didn't mean to trade. That's a sin, obviously. I'm not a filthy herog. But if I left some water cabbage here and weighed it down with a fish so the wind wouldn't blow it away, and the enlightened Sindar happened to find it and release the fish, may all become one, that wouldn't be trading, even if the enlightened Sindar happened to lose a copper coin on a rock by accident." "I don't have a copper coin, Goldie." "And what would you do with it anyway? Money doesn't exist anymore." "Oh, today it doesn't, tomorrow it does. The temple, may Mother protect it, says that those who don't work for Mother's glory want it. For now, they write down on a little board who works, and it's all messy. But soon, those who work will get a copper coin, and with that they'll be able to get a meal from the communal kitchen on their street." "I told you, I don't have a copper coin. I think I can accidentally drop 3 dried honey plants." "Could the noble Sindar perhaps drip a strip of dried meat? I know we're not supposed to eat it, but on the road to Mother's glory it's different. Strength is needed." "I don't have anything like that." "Then let the Sindar drop the plums, and I'll leave some cabbage weighed down with that fish. But for plums, it will be smaller fish." "Do as you like. I'm leaving the plums here and going because my cart and the other Sindars are waiting for me." In truth, I should have killed him, but I'd have enough. Enough blood. Even if he says he saw a Sindar by the river, so what? He's small, skinny trickster. They are probably used to him constantly scheming and fooling everyone. I waited until he paddled away, and the splash of his oar faded somewhere upriver. I took the fish and the green, shiny algae with a sharp smell. On the way back to the camp, I realized how hungry I was. Home was concerned. "Yet you should have killed him, Arjuk." "A corpse is far worse than conversations it are tensing. We have a story. We have passports. We even have travel papers from the capital temple. I can't leave a trail of bodies behind me. I've already killed 2 people today. Maybe that's enough." He sold me the fish. He'll keep quiet because if they find out, he'll be punished too. This isn't a game, Arjug, Hone said, staring gloomily at the fish steaks wrapped in leaves and sizzling on the flat stones. You don't know how close we are to death. I am not so well, and I don't know what will happen next. Maybe it's time for me to find out what happened. See, I used to be a scout in the cavalry of Hades, he began. Among other things, I did various jobs, in the Nassim War and even further, also during the Jugglers uprising in Ihalgar. Like now, I traveled in disguise or hid from people's eyes. We kidnapped commanders and couriers, scattered horses, burned bridges, sometimes ambushed squads. We killed high rankers in secret. We often had to dress up and pretend to be someone else. And I have a gift for that, Arjug. I don't just pretend to be who I dress up as. I become them. Of course, you remember who I really am and why I'm doing it, but only deep down, deep beneath. So when I dressed up as a priest, I became a priest. But then something happened. He fell silent. I grabbed the tongs, turned the sizzling fish steaks over. The algae were already soft and fragrant. The food would be ready in a moment. I reached for a knife and sliced a juicy plum in half. For a moment, I thought about making some nut brew too. When a person survives, they must celebrate. Even just to thank the Creator. I am still here. I still walk the world. I still walk the path uphill. The Archmatrons shared the sting with me. I don't know exactly what happened to me, but what I know is that she didn't reach my true soul. I felt her. I felt what she felt, and she also felt me. We did become one. They believe what's important and true is only what you feel. Thoughts and reason don't matter to them much. In fact, they see them as harmful. If you sympathize with someone, you must help them. If you change your mind, you must punish them, even if both are unjust or senseless. That doesn't matter. The feeling matters. She and I actually became one for a moment. You have never been so close to anyone, and neither had I. Not with a beloved, not with my mother. I was her and myself at the same time. She was herself and the priest I had invented. We felt each other's bodies and souls. That's why you and I survived. But he fell silent again. I nodded, grabbed the tongs, lifted a piece of fish off the stone and began to eat. That's how it works between Kiranis. It's called Gorohaku, a soul cutting. A ceremony performed between close friends or comrades in arms when things get serious, or when a soul festers with a wound. Sometimes it's to be able to continue living, sometimes to seek advice, or to shed a burden before death. I recognized it by the way he spoke. During Gorohaku, you are not supposed to ask too many questions. A person bears their soul. They'll reveal as much as they see fit. In such a moment, they are vulnerable, and it takes great tact not to wound them further. The more serious and painful things the Gorai Kaman says, the more you must behave casually. That's why I ate fish and fruit while he opened his soul. I was his Gorodaru. Home also ate, as if it was just an ordinary conversation. My invented priest saved us, he continued, but at the same time he came to life. He's within me. My gift has turned against me this time. I've been a traveling healer, a commander of enemy cavalry, a beggar, even a courtesan once. They were born within me and then left at my command. Home returned, but this time is different. That sting gave life to someone who didn't live. His name is... He spat out a large fishbone onto the ground. Undai Jekadei. Priest, veteran, neophyte, a fanatic. I'm stronger than him. For now. I've subdued him. But at times he wakes up, and then I go mad. He's like a wild horse. For now, I can't tame him. For now. I spat the bones into the fire and reached for another piece of fish. No one has ever come closer to me than Fataya, the Dark Matron. It lasted only a moment, but it was very deep. I know she ordered us killed, and I know why. I also know she intended it from the very beginning. And yet, I know it's ridiculous. He threw away the skin and grabbed another fish stack, tossing it between his hands. The wind blew smoke into his face, so he wiped his eyes with his palm. He drank some water and was silent for a while, staring at the ground between his boots. And yet, whenever I remember, my heart bleeds with despair. She ordered me killed. Fataya ordered me killed. It's like she killed herself. Mother, how I pity her. Goro Haku is a painful ceremony, and it's not entirely clear for whom it's harder. Each of us carries a lot of pain. When it's released, not only the one who cuts their soul suffers. The role of Ogrodu is also a heavy burden. The venom might weaken her over time. It's possible the priest will lose strength and fade or leave. It's possible I'll fully recover. But it's also possible. It's possible that one day he'll win. That Undai Jekadei will strangle home, son of Wormwoodar. And then... I remained silent. Then... You have to kill me, Dohima. I looked him straight in the eye. Then I ate my fish and licked my fingers. Any venom that doesn't kill right away weakens over time. Sometimes people go mad and become someone else, but underneath, they are still themselves. The hospital priests know how to handle that. He smiled hardly. There are no more priests, Arjuk. They were fed to the mother or stripped of their robes and sent to dig in the dirt and break stones. There are no more temples of Kamarasu and the uphill walker. No more watchers of the Creator. The lamps have been smashed. The statues toppled, and their scrolls and medicines were thrown into the fire. It's just you and me now, Arjuk. And we'll never be sure how things are. You have to fulfill your father's order and reach the northern lands. He knew why. He knew it was important. So if one day you look in my eyes and see the priest Undai Jekadei, kill me. I beg you as your vassal and as your protector. We finished eating the fish. We threw the bones and the leftover algae into the fire. The Goro Haku ritual was over. Usually, during such occasions, you drink ambrosia, as a sign of sincerity and to call upon the spirits as witnesses. We didn't have ambrosia, yet after the meal, we both felt as if we drank a jug each. We spoke normally, but an overwhelming exhaustion overwhelmed us. It came so unexpectedly that I didn't have time to worry. We had been through a lot this day. But that wasn't a reason to fall asleep while sitting. Let's sleep until nightfall. Oh, man, but from now on, we'll travel by night, just like... He trailed off into incoherent muttering, when suddenly toppled over onto his side, spilling water from the flask onto himself. I myself barely heard him. My ears were ringing, and I felt as if my face had turned into a wooden mask. I lifted my nearly limped hand and realized that my lips and cheeks had gone numb. With great effort, I understood that something had harmed us. Either the fish was bad, or the Archmatron's fruits were poisoned. I struggled to my feet. The rocks and fire swirled around me. It felt like the ground had turned soft like a bog, and I collapsed to my knees. I briefly thought I should force myself to vomit, but I couldn't move at all. I fell onto my side, desperately trying to keep my eyes open. A heavy, stone-like exhaustion filled me like water filling a jug, and my body became as heavy as a jug full of water. I couldn't move anymore, even when I saw people appear among the rocks, dressed in brown clothes, their faces wrapped in scarves. Even when a sack was thrown over my head. Though, at this point maybe it was just my eyes closing.